What's up, filmmaker? Today we're going to take a look at a couple camera cages for the A7S III, FX30 and FX3 because they are pretty similar anyway. So I've been using, I think, more than 5 camera cages already since I started out, and I always have a camera cage on my camera. I think I don't even know how the camera looks naked without a camera cage actually. And since I'm not sponsored by any of these brands, this is my honest and unbiased review. So without further ado, let's take a look what camera cages I brought for you. I'm going to show you all the cases one by one, and I'm going to show you what I like about them and also what I don't like about them, or what I'm missing on the specific cage. I'm also going to share you my ease of use of every single cage. Alright, let's start with the small rig A7S III OG cage. I already bought the same cage for my A7 III and I was pretty happy with it, so I went for the same cage for the A7S III as well. What I like about this cage, it is pretty sturdy. I bought it around 3 years ago, so it doesn't have a lot of modularity. As you can see, this is kind of the bare bones of a cage. You have to add NATO rails, etc. to make it more functional. Other than that, it will protect your camera pretty well. There's also a screw on the bottom plate of the cage, which actually all the small rig cages have. Another thing that I like about it is that the screw is not gonna fall off randomly because there's a safety mechanism, so you won't lose your screw unless you screw it out. There's also 2 mounting points for the camera, so it doesn't jiggle around inside the cage. As I said, the only downside is that there's no NATO rails where you can add a top handle on top, for example. The accessibility of the dial wheel is kinda limited here. As you can see, I can't really fit my fingers into it, so it's a little bit of a struggle to do so. And I don't know if it's only my model, but somehow the top part is kinda narrowed for my cage, which was not the case on the A7 III, as you can see here if I hold it side by side. So this is pretty much the bare bones of a cage. I think they don't even sell it anymore because there's so many more versatile cages than this one. So the next cage on our list is the F22 modular cage system from Falcom. And my first con is that the screw on the bottom plate is not gonna stay in there because I lost it, and I just found some random screw here which finally fits because it's not the same screws as on the other cages. But otherwise, this cage is very modular. Falcom was one of the first ones, I think, which came out with this modular cage where you can take off and add any accessories like top handles or side handles, and the accessibility of the dial again is even worse on this one. Also, unfortunately, there's only one mounting point, which means the camera is gonna jiggle around a little bit inside the cage. But the pros here, it is very modular. It's versatile to changing shooting modes from horizontal to vertical by detaching handles and rearrange it. Also, it's easy to fly it on a gimbal because you can take off top handles and side handles so easily. You can also add monitors, of course, to the top handle or to the side handle, or anyway actually on the cage, because they have a lot of accessories which fits into the cage. But unfortunately, I think you can only use Falcom's accessory line. I tried to add a top handle from small rig, but it doesn't fit because the NATO rail form is a little bit different. But I totally understand that from a brand's perspective. And also, they actually have enough accessories from their brand to use to make your camera cage feel good. Next cage on our lineup is the Tilta A7S III cage, and I think this one is the old cage actually. They told me they have a newer version which looks pretty similar to the FX30 FX3 cage, which I'm gonna show you right after this one. Also, same con as on the Falcom cage, unfortunately the screw is gonna fall off on the bottom plate. I don't know why they didn't add a safety mechanism as well on this cage. This will be super neat because I lose that stuff pretty fast. Unfortunately, on this cage there's also only one mounting point, which means the camera is gonna wiggle around a little bit, but less than on the Falcom cage because this one is more narrow and there's also kinda a rubber on the top. Something which is unique to this cage is that you can attach a rod without having to attach any additional holders. There are also NATO rails on top and on the left side of the cage, and there's even a rosette attachment as well, which I only saw on this cage. I personally don't use it, but it can come in handy for some accessories for sure. There's also a lot of mounting points on the right side of the handle, and there's also a screw on the bottom as well. One con here is that the bottom plate is not a Swiss Arco plate, so it doesn't really fit into any tripods, etc. But this problem is also on the previous cages we looked at previously. And as you can see, there's also a gap on the top NATO rail, which makes it attaching other handles from other brands a little bit sketchy other than their own top handle, because that one has a caoutchouc mount and you screw it in between the NATO rail. Obviously, you can also attach a top handle from another brand, a little bit panned to the side, but that also comes in with an uneven weight distribution. This cage is also as versatile as the Falcon cage, since Tilta also have NATO rail handles which you can mount on the side of the camera or also on top. And the NATO rails are also compatible with other brands, because these are the standard NATO rails. I also forgot to mention that you can use the attached rod to add a follow focus system, for example, which made my rig super easy when I went to China and wanted to add a follow focus system to make it much easier to pull focus on the anamorphic lenses from Sirui. By the way, the video is linked below if you want to take a look at that. As mentioned, this is the Tilta FX30 cage, which is pretty similar to the FX3 cage, I think. I don't even know if there's any difference, to be honest. This cage obviously looks a lot more modern than the old A7S III cage. Unfortunately, also here, the bottom screw is gonna fall off. But on the top NATO rail handle, they actually added the safety system for the screws. I don't know why they don't do it on the bottom plate. I definitely have to address that to them. This time we have 3 different mounting points, because the FX30 just has more 1/4-inch screw holes. This makes it feel like the camera is going to stay in place. Also, the top NATO rail is kinda optional to mount, but it's also in the basic package. Now finally, the bottom plate is an Arco Swiss plate, which means this cage fits into most tripods. There's also a coin on the bottom. Actually, I always meant coin instead of screw. Sorry for that. The only con here I see is there's a new Sony microphone, which uses the contacts, just like most flash triggers. And unfortunately, if you add the top NATO rail, it's gonna block out that caoutchouc mount on top. I mean, you get a new one from the cage, but unfortunately it's not functional because it doesn't have the contacts. Otherwise, same as the other Tilta cage, all the accessories fits on this cage as well. Alright, here comes the last cage before we assemble a whole rig into a functional shooting rig. This is the small rig Reno cage for the A7S III. As on any other small rig cages, the screw on the bottom is gonna stay in place. The cage compared to the OG cage is much more narrow and tight. Unfortunately, that comes with a payoff, because on one side the mounting surface is pretty narrow, which makes it a little bit scary to mount stuff on the right side, which you won't do a lot anyways. What I like here is that there's also 3 mounting points, 2 on the bottom, the screw and a pinpoint, and 1 on the left hinge attachment. Since this cage is a little bit more sleek, the dial button is very accessible. This is the first cage which the dial button is easily accessible and the camera doesn't wiggle around. The bottom side is also an Arco Swiss plate, which means you can attach it on top of most tripods. This time the hot shoe mount is free, so you can attach the Sony microphone. There's also a coin on the bottom, which you need to attach the cage. Unfortunately, there's no NATO rail on top, but you can attach a NATO rail without any problems. And the cage unfortunately kind of corrodes, I think, on the bottom side where the coin or the screwdriver or the multi-tool is. I don't know why it starts to corrode there. I know I have a lot of NATO rail attachments, but these are so handy for me because you can just attach them and take it off and just change the shooting modes, or just detach it to put it on a gimbal if you want to. And the ones from small rig just snap on like that. But I also had some problems with them if the spring is kind of loose, but you can fix that by tightening the screws. But if you're outside somewhere in the field, you usually don't bring these tools with you because the screws are exceptionally small. Alright, let's assemble a little rig here so you can see a real life example on how that can look like. Obviously, they can look different depending on what kind of project I'm doing. First, I'm doing a horizontal professional rig, and then I'm going to do a more vertical social media kind of rig. This rig will be a handy handheld rig with a comfortable way to get smooth footage. Sometimes I do mix up different brands because I already have the parts, so there's no need to buy new ones. On this specific rig, I'm using the FX30 inside a Tilta cage with a full frame 16-35 lens, a V-mount holder from small rig which fits into the Swiss Arco bottom plate, a small rig V-mount battery, a SmallRig NATO top handle, and an Atomos Ninja 5 camera monitor, which in my opinion is the most accurate monitor. And that one is attached on a SmallRig monitor swivel mount. I also attached a tilter tripod feet, which automatically opens if you release it. Super neat, by the way. A D-tap cable to power on the monitor, and a HDMI cable from the monitor to the camera. Now we're going to assemble a social media rig for vertical content. It really depends on what I'm shooting, but sometimes I don't even use a monitor to shoot social media content. But if I do so, I mostly swap out my Ninja 5 with the Fieldworld LUT 5 monitor, because that one natively has a 1/4 inch thread on the side and is also a bit lighter actually. So I'm switching up between the SmallRig and the tilter handle because I just got the tilter handle recently, but it actually feels great and gives you a bit more stability for vertical content because the distance from the arm to the camera is a tiny bit longer compared to the SmallRig side handle. For this cage I'm using the cold shoe mount to attach the monitor, but usually on the SmallRig cage I can attach the monitor directly on the camera cage with the same monitor swivel mount as before. Alright, that's it for today. Let me know down below which cage was your favorite, and also let me know what kind of cage do you use, or if I'm missing something in this video which you think is very convenient. And also if you have any further questions, just let me know down below in the comments as well. Thank you so much if you stayed until the end. Here's a video you might be interested, and hopefully I will catch you in the next one.